For anybody who hasn't had their head under the rock, there's obviously been quite a bit of discussion lately about some issues with the Dota 2 Pro circuit, or as we all refer to it, the DPC. Valve obviously has been open to fixing the circuit and making changes in response to pro, community, etc. feedback. So I just kind of wanted to take some time to go through the discussion and say, okay, what would our feedback be looking at this from a logical point of view? Let's jump in with a Nessa narrative on the DPC and my thoughts about why incremental changes, which has been kind of Valve's approach this past year, won't address some of the underlying issues that we're seeing come to light this year. And so first we're going to start off with a summary of the DPC history, how far we've come, where we've gone, what we've tried, some of the current problems, and then a bunch of potential solutions. And that's where I'm really looking for feedback. I want to know, this is my opinion or what I've gathered just from talking to people like Nahaz or who else of ways that the DPC could be fixed. And so I really want discussion and feedback and thoughts about what those solutions actually look like. So to jump in. The first thing I really want to say is that Band-Aids don't actually fix anything. And so this is a reference to my title. These incremental changes aren't going to address some of the underlying issues that we're seeing really highlighted in the DPC this year. So if we take a step back, where exactly did the Dota Pro circuit come from? If we think back to, the TI4, TI5 era, before we really had anything, we had rampant roster shuffling, absolutely no stability in NA. Not that there's much more now, but hey, it's better. Very top-heavy prize pools at the internationals. There was absolutely no transparency when it came to TI invites. Teams had no idea who was going to be invited and what the criteria was. Tournaments had no scheduling, there was no system in place, sponsors didn't know when their teams would be playing, teams didn't know when they would be playing until something was announced last minute, and there was a huge focus on the international, which always took place in Seattle, so it was difficult for the entire world to watch, and so we're looking for ways to bring that international feel around the world, spread out the prize pool, and add some kind of structure to the Dota ecosystem. So this was first sort of test run at DAC, the Dota 2 Asia Championships in 2015, where there was a compendium that resulted in significant crowdfunding for the prize pool, bumping the prize pool up to about 3 million. Yes, this was over 4 years ago. That's how long Sumail has been with us in the spotlight. I believe Sumail Axe. And definitely Storm Spirit made quite a showing at that tournament. And that was really the first tester for this new system that Valve had in mind. A very, very big event with TI level prize money. I mean, at that point, the previous TI had been $10 million. So 3 million wasn't quite there, but it was rather significant for Dota. It was about halfway between TI4 and TI5, taking place in January and February. And it took place in the East. It was in China, sort of giving the opposite side of the world the chance to experience that TI hype and importance. And so following TI5, Valve announced the 2015-2016 major season. This season would come with roster locks that would require teams to register their roster at a certain date before the next major if they wanted to be eligible to compete in it. Of course, you could go through open qualifiers, but if you wanted an invite to the tournament or an invite to closed qualifiers, that roster needed to be locked. There were 3 majors, each with 3 million in prize money. And if you remember, OG were rather good at winning those, thus the birth of Dream Green. And it was also the time of death to all whiteboards. You will be remembered, James. Now, the roster locks, some of these images I picked were a little bit of a joke because players could be kicked at the very last minute before a roster lock, not giving them time to find a new team, forcing them into the open qualifiers. This, potentially got abused. If anybody remembers the Team Secret, Evil Geniuses, Digital Chaos roster shuffle, didn't work out great for EG or Secret. That was Puppy's lowest placing year at a TI ever. Digital Chaos did pretty well though, taking second place at TI, so I'm not sure that they're complaining about what happened there. But there were clearly problems with this system. The majors were too big and too important, and they took up about an entire month of the Dota schedule, making all third-party tournaments anytime in that time period completely irrelevant and impossible to operate. And teams were rather worn out with this schedule of maintaining third-party tournaments and majors. And I'd just like to note, not that this gets fixed in the next season, but still no idea who gets invited to TI. So the majors tried the 2016 to 2017 era. We went down to 2 majors for our second try and added a new roster lock system. So in this system, teams had a last day before they could remove anyone from a roster, and then there was a second extension date in which anyone could be added to a roster. And then at that final lock, you could no longer make changes. This meant that if you wanted to remove someone from the team, it gave them, if I recall correctly, something like a week and a half to 2 weeks to find a new team, which plenty of time in the Dota world. Not really. Teams should have more of a chance to work out a new roster, but it was better. It was an improved system. And so this seemed pretty good, but it was the death of really any top teams playing in any qualifier ever. They just received direct invites to the majors and to the other big third-party tournaments, and they just sort of sat back, played in the majors, a couple big tournaments, and we really didn't see them participating outside of that. They didn't play in qualifiers, they weren't at the smaller lands, and fans and probably even sponsors of these big teams were kind of getting, left out. They didn't get to see their favorite teams play. And then additionally, as I mentioned, still no clarity for the TI invite system. No idea how teams get invited to the biggest tournament of the year. $20 million on the line? Yeah, we'll invite whoever we want. Obviously, that's not how Valve does it. They clearly have criteria in place with how they weighted tournaments and attributed different wins to different teams and decided on who they wanted at TI. But this was a very, very large sticking point. So this all led to the introduction of the Dota 2 Pro Circuit. So with the introduction of the Dota 2 Pro Circuit, we saw a wonderful thing for South America. I'm not sure how much it changed in Europe, but South America now got their own dedicated qualifiers as well as the CIS region. This being very important for South America because of the ping differences between South American and North American servers. And I imagine this also is a problem with CIS and EU. I'm just not as personally familiar with those server differences. A whopping 13 majors and 13 minors were announced. 26 tournaments that were worth DPC points. So essentially Valve went, nope, we're not paying for these majors anymore. We're not going through all of this organizational effort. We're not going to be this hands-on. Third-party tournaments apply to us. We'll grant you DPC status and we'll give you half of your prize pool. So whatever these tournaments put up for prize pool, Valve would match it and double it. Minors were worth 300 points and majors were worth 1,500 points, with the minor minimum prize pool being 150,000 from the organizer, and then Valve contributes 150,000. So the minor minimum prize pool is 300,000, and that makes the total major minimum prize pool was 1 million, with again Valve contributing half. So there ended up, not being 26 tournaments because that's not insane or anything. There was only 22 because a few of the majors didn't end up happening. If anybody remembers that lovely tournament, Galaxy Battles, with drug testing for Dota players, that was a fun one. That lost its major status. But 22 tournaments is still quite a lot with absolutely no restrictions on who could be playing in any of these tournaments. Now, the idea was that the minors would be reserved for smaller tier 2 teams to give them a chance to earn some points and some international experience, while all the big teams would be playing in the majors. 9 of them, you'd think they'd be busy enough. Unfortunately, a lot of teams, Liquid and Secret, decided to play in a lot of minors, absolutely dominate them, and earn a ton of points to contribute towards them qualifying for TI from this minor system. And then on top of all of that, you can imagine with 22 tournaments going on, there were a lot of qualifiers happening that got scheduled on top of each other. And it became a scheduling battle of, well, this one's a major qualifier and this one a minor qualifier, so I'll forfeit my minor game to play in the major game. Oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to qualify for this major, so I guess I'll try and qualify for this minor. Oh no, the teams look stronger in this minor, so I should forfeit these games and try and play this. It was a mess with the studios stepping on top of each other. Scheduling was a nightmare and teams were absolutely stressed out playing all of the time, and there would be these really, really high intensity Dota times and then absolutely no Dota at all. So it was not a very healthy system. It wasn't great for fans. It wasn't great for sponsors, as they had to split viewers between everything. It was awful for anybody trying to schedule anything. And then, to top it all off, the point system, you earned your invite to TI based on the top 3 point earners on your team. Now, the last roster lock for TI was February 6th, which is like 6 to 7 months before the tournament actually happened. So teams had to be locked in about 6 months ahead of time. And at that, roster lock date, you can make any swaps you wanted. And your top 3 point earning players would determine your point totals for heading to TI. So I don't know if anybody remembers, but VP traded a player over to Na'Vi. If you're ever curious, take a look at the sponsors and the backgrounds of those 2 teams, and you could question about how this exactly happened. But Na'Vi jumped up from ranking nowhere bottom of the battle DPC all the way up to, I believe, 5th place with 1 player swap from the very successful VP to the very not successful Na'Vi. Now, Na'Vi didn't actually end up at TI that year, so as far as we know, nothing was too ridiculously abused. But it definitely could have been abused with teams with a lot of money, basically buying players, putting together a squad, and trying to guarantee themselves a TI invite. But we had stability, we had better scheduling, we had way more spread out prize money. So again, benefits, but needed some refinement. And that brings us to the current DPC system, the 2018 to 2019 DPC. So Valve cut it down to 5 minors and majors and paired them together, where the winner of a minor qualified to the subsequent major. You would play the major qualifiers first, and anybody who qualified for the major could not compete in the minor. This allows the minor to really be dedicated to tier 2 teams, or a tier 1 team who made a really big mistake. And then the major would be saved for all the really big teams. And then the minor winner would kind of add an extra regional slot, because a lot of what we've seen try to be done with TI and DPC is to sort of even out different regional strengths. So if you take all 6 regions and have them compete together, the winning region is going to get an extra team representation at the minor, which is supposed to help make up for differences in regional strengths. The qualifier schedule is announced at the beginning of the season to prevent any overlaps. Everybody knows what's happening. And then also, I forgot to mention this on the last slide, but majors are now required to have 16 teams, with minors having 8 teams. In the 2017-2018 DPC season, we saw a Dream League major have only 8 teams. I think we saw another major, maybe Epicenter. I'm not sure. There's another one with 12 teams. And so they standardized the amount of teams in majors and minors. They changed the point totals to belong to the teams, the organization, rather than the players. So theoretically, you could have an organization change all of its players and still qualify for TI. That's probably not going to happen, but it could. It 100% has the potential to happen for some hyper-rich person to buy out a team. And literally, this system could theoretically buy a slot at TI. Now, TI is everything, so I don't really see any players turning down the option to do that. And 100%, I think that Valve would step in at that point. But the current way that the rules are written is you could theoretically buy a slot at TI if teams had enough DPC points to handle you do get a point penalty for changing players. But if they had enough points to mitigate that, you can literally buy a slot at TI. So moving on from that, the invite system was abolished. Every team now has to qualify for DPC tournaments, which means that we see all of our favorite teams play and nobody just gets invited and gets to sit back on their butts and not do anything. And then only 1 team from each region can qualify to TI through the qualifiers. So the top 12 point earning DPC teams will be invited, and then 6 more teams to give us 18 at TI, which we've seen in the past few years as they've had more than the traditional 16. those teams will only have one qualifier per region. And so theoretically, what we see happen here is every single region gets an equal representation in the qualifiers, and then the entire DPC system and all the tournaments and the points make up for the differences in strengths between regions. Now, this is theoretically true. However, the fact that every single tournament has different qualifier slot allotment for regions and there's no standardized qualifier slots means that some teams get more of a chance to prove their region's strength than other teams do, and that remains unclear. So we're going to jump into that now that we're done with your history lesson, we can talk about the actual problems that I've been mentioning and some of my potential solutions. And again, this is where I would love to hear what people have to say about, other solutions and maybe any problems that I missed or didn't mention. So first, as I said, there's that 4,000 word blog post that I'm not making you read by watching this video, but I would like to highlight part of it here. So this whole thing, it seemed great, right? Seems like we were going to address a lot of issues. Are you a tournament org that scheduled their tournament too close to a DPC event? Scheduling that probably happened well before the DPC schedule was announced? Expect to have most of your teams drop out. ESL. Oh great, you won a minor. Now you have 5 days to travel 6 time zones and prepare to compete against 15 teams that just had a whole tournament of tape on you to study. Tigers. Dream League to Kuala Lumpur. Have a player with a family visa or personal crisis? Looks like you'll have to take it to Twitter if you want a ruling from Valve. NIP. Drop a racial slur because playing in the Dota bubble has prevented you from ever learning how to play nice in the real world. Cuckoo. Looks like you messed with Valve's cash cow. They don't have your back when it comes to competitive integrity. Good bet they might lie about it too. Can't get along with your teammates? Envy. Go ahead and kick them a couple weeks before a major that they qualified for. Your team still has the same name, so you must be the same team that qualified. Need more days in your tournament to justify the cost to sponsors? Dota Pit. Look no further than a meaningless group stage where everyone ends up in the upper bracket anyways. Okay, maybe not. Maybe there's a few problems. And yes, maybe I'm laying it on a little tiny bit thick, but this exacerbation of some of the problems kind of highlights what we're about to jump into and talk about. So where does that leave us? After that rather snarky paragraph, I do want to lighten things up a little. The DPC is not bad, okay? Just like any large system, it needs refinement, maybe a drastic change or two, but it is not bad. It is made with great, wonderful intentions that we need to remember and appreciate. All right, so first up, problem. There's a lack of rules for stand-ins. What sort of stand-ins result in point penalties? Which ones are an exception? Should teams be penalized by both having to play with a suboptimal roster and only earning a portion of the points they deserve? And should teams really have to wait for maybe getting a response from Valve on their situation, often relying on social media, PPD, to get Valve's attention for them? Solution, more rules and/or a commissioner. Crazy idea here. More communication. Now, if you watch my podcast with Nahaz and Richard Lewis and everything, this has come up a lot. We've talked about the need for a community manager. Nahaz has brought up this commissioner idea. All we're asking for is communication. It doesn't even have to be public communication. Teams should just have someone dedicated that they talk to that gives them a response in a timely manner without Twitter and Reddit being the tool that forces Valve's hands. Because what we see happen now that that situation has been created, nothing against Coddle Guy, but we know that Reddit outrage is why he got invited. We know that PPD tweeting and having it blow up on Reddit is why Valve releases statements. We know that Valve listens to Reddit. And even if they already had something in mind, like the Roshan statues that are insanely late, if they only announce them after a Reddit explosion, it continues to look like they are caving to Reddit. Reddit represents a small portion, the vocal minority most likely, because if you look at how many people play Dota and how many people are active on Reddit, the numbers are very different. You are giving that power to an algorithm completely outside of Valve's control that won't always necessarily be the best thing, but it will be what everyone is talking about. So if communication happens ahead of time in a timely manner, we can actually Valve can keep their power. They don't have to keep bowing down to Reddit. There doesn't have to be huge drama explosions. They can manage this, and all you need is some kind of commissioner. Would I love for that communication to be public and transparent? Yeah, great. But I also know that's a really easy way for Reddit to pick things apart and whine. But if you can handle player issues ahead of time without anyone needing to whine on Twitter, I think suddenly a lot of problems would have been fixed. Problem number 2. This is a really, really, really big problem. Tournaments do not make money. These DPC tournaments and the third-party tournaments are having a very hard time making money. And everyone always asks, they think they're so smart. And they say, well, if they're not making money, why do they keep doing them? A lot of these orgs are most likely kept afloat by big, big, big money above them, floating them through what is seen as an investment period. You've heard of startups. Startups run on venture capital. Again, this has been discussed. Naz and I have talked about it ad nauseum. Venture capital is doing a lot. Now, we also see a ton of sponsors. If you're watching Dota Pit, you see ads running nonstop. So tournaments, and if you watch ESL, oh my goodness, they have 1 million advertisers to make their tournament financially viable. But that's really just to break even if they're lucky. These tournaments are most likely losing money or making very little. Ask Sunspan about Captain's Draft and how that went. Think about the cost the tournament has to pay. They have to rent a studio or a venue for a significant amount of time. They have to run qualifiers. They have to fly out and pay all of the talent and production people. They have to get all the equipment, the PCs that the players are playing on, all of the production equipment, you know, the expensive cameras and everything else. They have to pay for flights, hotel, and food for everyone, okay? That is 16 teams. And then a whole production team. Even if you estimate like low end 1,500 or like 1,000 per person, you're still talking about absolutely massive numbers. I mean, I haven't sat here and done the math, but you know, say anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000 just to feed, fly, and hotel everyone. Yeah, I think that's actually pretty accurate because it's 36,000 for 4 teams. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of money to fly and accommodate and all of these people. And then there's also half the prize pool. You need to come up with $500,000 if you are a major. You need sponsors to be contributing. So that means sponsorship-wise, you probably have to look at coming up with, I don't know, 600,000 or 700,000 and then hope that you are selling tickets in your venue to make up the rest of the cost. And if you make money, how much are you really gonna make? And how long can organizers stay in the scene when they're not making any money? Because that esports bubble is going to burst. And then on top of that, sponsors can't even be promised viewer hours because you have sorry Bulldog, sorry Kezu, sorry Grant, sorry Syndrin, sorry anybody else. You have a significant percentage, 25 to 50% of your viewers watching third-party streams because tournaments don't have broadcast rights. So you can't even promise viewer eyes on your sponsors' advertisements and logos because they're just going to go watch another stream. So you either have to invite these personalities or suck it up and go, sorry sponsors, we significantly under-delivered on projected viewer hours because other people can stream our tournament for free. So here's the solution. The primary one, give tournaments exclusive broadcast rights. Yes, we were all very frustrated when ESL streamed on Facebook. Yes, every single person on Twitch was our savior for giving us a way to watch outside of Facebook. But tournaments are losing a lot of money because of this. It's harder to sell to sponsors. They're not making any revenue off their Twitch channel or rights or anything like that. It's a huge loss. Valve, you own your IP. You're giving people DPC status. Part of giving DPC status should be giving broadcast exclusivity. And then on top of that, we need to reintroduce revenue sources for these tournament organizers, in addition to potentially for these teams, especially the smaller teams. There's a bunch of ways to do this, and I outline a whole bunch of them in the blog post. But, ideas off the top of my head, we used to be able to buy team banners in games, so you could equip your favorite team's banner while you were watching. And then when you looked at the game in-game, you could see, okay, how many Na'Vi fans are there? How many Alliance fans are there watching right now? And it was a really fun thing. So you could tie these banners to each specific tournament, where you would have to buy them on a tournament-based basis if you wanted them. You could tie a TP color to it that represents the color of the tournament. You could create a collection book that when you filled out the collection book, you earn Dota Plus shard, whatever you want to do to make it so that it's a renewable resource for every single tournament. You could also do player signatures, where you have one signature from one player on each team every single tournament. If you have 5 DPC events, there's 5 players, so even if they attend all 5, there's a tournament for each of them to use their signature. And then you could also do, tournament prediction brackets, where you have to pay for tickets and you get rewarded in DPC, or you get rewarded in shards or Dota Plus membership or an old recycled chest, something like that. And then you split the revenue between the teams who are contributing their signature or their logo for a banner, the tournaments who are running the entire thing, and then Valve, you can still keep 50% of it. Claim back your prize pool. Go for it. Next problem, DPC scheduling in general. Open qualifiers for the next major happen during the current major. So if you happen to be kicked from your team after the major and want to play on a new team for the upcoming major, bummer, because you were playing at the major and now you can't play in the qualifiers for the next one because you didn't have time to play in the opens. That's a fun one. Or if you are talent, you are a pro player, say Black, who is being an analyst at a tournament, and you are stuck at the tournament and can't play in the open qualifiers to make it to the next tournament, kind of forcing you into that analyst life. And then minor winners have 1 week to travel to the major and prepare for 15 teams who have just spent the week watching them. Now, really, this was only a big issue for the Dream League Kuala Lumpur combination for the first DPC round. After that, the tournaments have been geographically much closer together, but that 1 week is still kind of fast because those teams have to travel. And as I said, they have to prepare for 15 teams, and those 15 teams have had a long time to prepare, and they've been watching you for a whole week, so they probably know your strategies pretty well. And then third-party tournaments that are too close to a DPC event get completely screwed, like recently ESL One Mumbai, which had, I think, 4 teams pull out at the last moment. 5? Maybe 5. A lot. So the solution that I propose is cutting this down to 4 DPC cycles. We saw this with the first round of majors, that 3 was way too many for the time that they took up. And I think that 5 is pushing the envelope just a little bit as far as scheduling. So first of all, Valve needs to work with endemic organizers, mostly ESL and DreamHack, because they'll schedule their events years in advance. And so you need to try and work your DPC schedule. Obviously, you don't want to give every single tournament to them. That's not fair. But taking a look at their existing event schedule and trying to work the DPC in a nice way around it. Increase the space between a major and the next major's qualifiers. Consider increasing the space between a minor and a major. The problem with that is then you run into the danger of interfering with more third-party tournaments. But if you cut down to 4 events, hopefully that's better. And overall, try and interfere less with third-party events so that they can stay relevant even when they're not a part of the DPC. Another problem, qualifier slot distribution. The International finally has full transparency and equality in qualifier slots. Why not have DPC tournaments work the same way? This is something that I've seen a bunch of people contribute a bunch of ideas towards, and this is what I've boiled it down to, and I'm sure there's further refinements that can be made here. But basically, a rework of the invite and qualifying system. So if you up the minors to 12 teams, you can give 2 slots to each region and then send the top 2 to the major. And the way to kind of fix this, and yes, somewhere there's a typo. Have fun finding it while I talk. So the way that's going to make the grand finals mean nothing. So what you can do right now is if you win the minor and then you get more points at the subsequent major, you actually lose all of your minor points. What you could do is permanently award the minor points to the minor winner and then additionally give them points at the major that they then qualify for. This way, there's still quite a bit of incentive to win those grand finals, and you're giving teams something, because if you don't give them anything, then that's basically a worthless game because they both qualify to the major anyway. Now, then if the majors also have 2 qualifier spots for each region, that brings us to 14 total teams. So we still need 2 more. And I think the idea that's been thrown around a lot, that does make sense, it's going to have a few issues with it, but it's not terrible, is give the previous major grand finalists, they qualify for the next major. That final game is going to matter no matter what. So they're both going to qualify for the major, but they're fighting for a lot of points and a lot of money. So by giving them both qualifying spots and not just the winner, you're not taking away the value of the game at all. And then you're bringing the next major up to 16 teams. The potential issue here is if you have Liquid and Secret in the grand finals of every single major, you're going to have Liquid and Secret guaranteed to be in every single major, and then you're never going to see them play in anything else. I don't think that's as much of a problem, because if we maintain third-party tournament relevance, then Liquid and Secret will just get invited to everything. We'll see them play in a bunch of tournaments. They will still play. Yes, they won't be in as many qualifiers, but fans will still get to see them, and you're really giving fairness to the distribution of slots. Because when you look at it, if you have 12 teams in the minor with equal representation from everywhere, and then they're all playing each other, you can then count for different regional strength, right? If China is the strongest region, then the 2 teams they send to the minor will absolutely crush everybody, and then China gets extra spots at the major. And that way you truly determine regional strength within an international competition, not just with perceived strength of regions based on what Valve thinks. And then the last thing that I want to mention, because I guess I don't have it on the slide here, but it is in the blog post, is that there's been a lot of criticism going on right now of the Dota Pit scheduling. And honestly, I think that tournaments have to do what they need to do to make their tournament unique, to make it exciting. Nobody's going to like all the best of ones in the lower bracket and a meaningless group stage, but it gave them extra viewer hours and it made their lower bracket games more impactful. It increased press coverage. It increased people talking about the events. Having every single event with the exact same format would be so boring. So for now, I think you let tournaments have the format that they want, have a commissioner, again, be the ones checking those formats, which Valve does have someone checking the formats currently. And the only real thing I would be concerned about is any format that potentially has 12, 14, 16-hour days. Those need to be adjusted. Teams should not be playing at midnight and then be playing at 9 a.m. the next day. There should definitely be protection of player health and competitive integrity in tournament formats. But other than that, have at it. We do not want every tournament to have the same format. So ultimately, the DPC really is great, okay? As we see, Gunner's family going to Disney without him, Black missing qualifiers because he's talent at an event, Cuckoo theoretically banned from China, the home of TI9, and group stages that end with everyone in the upper bracket, it's hard to remember that the DPC has done a lot of things right. We have TI invite clarity. We have some attempt at roster stability. There's a clear roadmap for teams and sponsors who know how visible their brand will be for the year. And there's some relevance for third-party organizers who get DPC status. Just like any relationship expert will tell you, communication is key. And we have all been in bed with Valve for a very, very long time, so all we're asking for is slightly better communication.